In 1790, the nation's first naturalization law came into effect. It stated that free white persons could gain citizenship if they lived in the U.S. for 2 years and had good character. And actually, it says free white persons of good character and Christian morals. They like to edit that part out. They don't want to mention that ever, but in the original documents that is there. The new citizens' children under the age of 21 were given citizenship too, but these new naturalization laws ignored massive swathes of American society, including enslaved people and Native Americans, none of whom were considered citizens. Well, slaves were considered property at the time, but we went over that once some time ago. Look, the Industrial Revolution happened in England in 1854, I think, and reached America shortly thereafter. So the whole slavery issue was a matter of antiquated farm equipment. That sounds terrible. You're going to call me an istophobe bigot. I don't care. Here are my fucks once again.
It's istophobe ist.
My bad.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Or istophobe igot acist.
I have the fucks for that are over here.
Is there like a city called Fucksgiven in Michigan?
There should be.
Yeah, there should be.
There should be. Actually, I went to hell and back one day.
Yeah.
The new let's see, slavery challenged the concept of birthright citizenship. In 1857, as arguments about slavery roiled, the U.S. Supreme Court went a step further, finding in the Dred Scott versus Sanford case that Scott, a man who had escaped slavery and was suing for his freedom, was not a citizen because he was African descent. I mean, I'm sorry. Nor could any other person of African descent be considered a citizen, even if they were born in the United States. But the definition did not last long. During and after the Civil War, lawmakers returned to the debate about whether black people should have birthright citizenship. What was new in the 1860s was the possible for radical legal transformation that accompanied war and its aftermath. Straight up, this was to punish the South. These people didn't care about, okay, when emancipation happened, where were the slaves? What slaves were emancipated?
They're in the South.
What about the ones that were further in the north? Because some of the northern states still had, I think Maryland still had slavery.
I'm not sure. I know
nothing happened to them.
There was a lot of states that outlawed slavery like decades
until the 13th Amendment.
Yep.
Nothing happened to them. And do I have the history of the... I'm looking at something else that I have on my screen over here.
Now, and listen, don't get mad at us. We're literally just telling you the way it went down. We weren't there. We're just telling you the truth.
Yeah, exactly. So in 1868, they finally ratified the no war slavery thing. Or 1865. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime where the party had been duly convicted, shall exist in the United States.
Or child support.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing. And it is indentured servitude.
It is. 100%.
It is absolutely indentured servitude. So you've got all of these blacks in the South, and in order to basically punish the South, Attorney General Edward Bates tackled the issue in connection with African American members of the Union Army, finding that free men of color born on American soil were American. After the war, the Reconstructionist Congress passed a civil rights law that extended citizenship to all people born in the U.S. who were not subject to any foreign power. What law was that? Civil Rights Bill of 1866. That's a new one on me. I need to note that.
What was the Democratic Party's response to that in the South? They kicked up the KKK and the Jim Crow laws. That was the Democratic Party that did that.
That's true. That's true. But there's another factor that a lot of people don't know about. And I lived in the deep South when I was 10 years old. For a year, I lived in Chickasaw, Alabama. And they had people come in and talk to us. And I was in third grade. Many of the slaves, remember, these are expensive farm equipment. And many of the female slaves had 8, 10, 12 kids. Mm-hmm. Now, I've talked to actual death camp refugees from North Korea. I've sat across the table from actual death camp refugees. The first thing to go is your desire to breed. It's a defensive mechanism in the human head, which means that the slaves, despite the fact that they were slaves, okay, slave bad, let's clear that up right away. Slave bad. They were treated well because they were expensive farm equipment. Many of the slaves, as it turns out, I learned when I was 10 years old, stayed on with their former owners just as workers now.
Yep.
And to this day have lifelong friendships with those families. They're still friends 200 years later.
Well, if I
180
recall,
years later.
like to have a slave, you could purchase one. It was the equivalent of either 2 or 3 years worth of pay.
Yes.
And that's why 4 to 6% of the population could afford to have them, and they were basically
Yes.
almost all in the southern states.
Yes. Yep. Most of the slave owners were extremely wealthy. Many of them were black, particularly in the state of Louisiana. There were a lot of black slave owners in Louisiana. And many of the field workers were treated worse than the slaves, the sharecroppers. And we used to learn about those in like grade school and stuff. They were the poor whites who didn't have land that would work for a portion of the crop. So they'd either sell it or they would have food to eat. But they were basically expendables. Those were the expendables. Slaves were expensive. That's why a slave female would have 8, 10, 12 children. And of course, that wasn't always the case. Yes, there were slaves who were whipped and beaten and killed and raped and all of that. Yes, that happened. But for the most part, they were expensive farm equipment. Now, to them becoming citizens in 1865 and 1866, all right, that seems to me to be reasonable. They're here. 1822, many of them were returned to Liberia, which was purchased by a bunch of wealthy Americans who thought slavery was wrong. They bought a piece of prime real estate in Africa and created the country of Liberia and gave them our constitution.
Is that place still around?
Liberia?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Do you know what state it's in?
I don't know.
It is ruled by petty warlords, and it has the highest rate of AIDS in Africa.
Wow.
I think it lasted like a year and a half before it reverted to bad.
Yeah.
So that's an entirely different thing. We won't tackle that one right now. The 14th Amendment extended birthright citizenship. The most sweeping declaration of birthright citizenship came in 1868 with the 14th Amendment. It defines citizenship as applying to all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Notably, due to the jurisdiction requirement, most Native Americans were excluded from this amendment. To this day, I believe it's true that Native Americans do not have to take on U.S. citizenship.
Watch Grunt Speak live every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. And if you want to join Pop for Supporters Sundays, go to redonkulous.com/donate and make a monthly pledge. A link is in the Meat Gazer box.